Arigatou gozaimasu. Thanks for coming tonight. Now first, we based our book on extensive research from Dentsu Young and Rubicam's Brand Asset Valuator. We call it BAV. Now BAV is the largest database of brands in the world. We have over 50,000 brands. We've invested almost $130 million in the study, and it allows us to understand not only how people feel about brands, but what is their mood, what are their attitudes, and what are their values. So we'll talk a little bit about what SpendShift is about. And what we saw were people that were looking to buy from brands whose companies or values are similar to my own. Again, these values were things that we expect out of companies to act with ethics and to act with integrity. And we're going to look at some trends this evening that drive that. The other thing we noticed is that consumerism became a larger question during the crisis. As people started to ask, how many things do I need to have? How much stuff? Maybe I could spend more carefully and more strategically. So the question, I realize how many possessions I have does not have to do with how happy I am. Nearly 2/3 of people and almost 80% of the SpendShift felt that way. So it doesn't mean that we're going to be frugal and stop spending, but we're going to spend more carefully. It's about, do I have value and values in how I'm talking to my consumer and my customer? So the idea of kindness and empathy is really understanding the customer and getting close to really connecting with their needs. So what we're going to do tonight is look at 5 trends. 5 trends that make up the SpendShift movement. The first trend is something that we call the new frontier. And the new frontier is due to the part that the recession and the crisis actually offers hope and opportunity, if you choose to look at it that way. So we're going to look at stories of optimism and hope and opportunity, people reinventing themselves out of the crisis. Now, it's not just restaurants. It's actually all kinds of high-tech entrepreneurs coming to Detroit. This is Paul Savage. He brought back Thomas Edison's direct current, DC current, which is much more efficient type of electricity. He started his own energy company in Detroit. And when we met him, he called it green energy that's made only in Detroit. So you have this portrait of this community that's been so hard hit, and yet they're finding ways to rise back up. That really tracked with what we saw in our data, that there's greater opportunity for individual businesses to compete with large companies than there used to be. Almost 40% of American consumers, 37% of Japanese consumers felt that they had a better shot at being entrepreneurial, whether starting a new business or taking on the institutions. So we'll look at the second of the 5 trends. This new trend is called "Don't Fence Me In." And this is an American slogan of cowboys. Cowboys don't want to be fenced in. They want to be open and have freedom. One of the problems with the recession is because people lost their homes, or they lost their jobs, they lost their freedom because they spent too much money, or they were finding new ways to grow. And so what Don't Fence Me In is about retooling your life, finding new skills, going back to school, finding a new way to start your life fresh after the crisis. That the crisis brought an opportunity to be better. We also saw a trend toward going back to school and learning. This is an amazing story of a woman named Miriam Rodriguez. She's the head of the Dallas Public Library System. During the recession, many people came to America's libraries to look for work using the computers because all of the classified ads are now online. She recognized that people needed help. So she started a number of job training seminars and helping people retrain their skills and even go back to college. Now, the interesting thing was the internet was supposed to kill the library system. Why do you need libraries when you have the internet? Today in America, 68% of people have a library card. It's the highest level ever. So people making things is part of this movement. And that really reflected what we saw in the data, that this was all about self-reliance. Since the recession, I'm interested in learning new skills so I can do more for myself and rely less on others. Almost 2/3 of Americans and almost over two-thirds of Japanese consumers focusing on self-reliance. The third of the 5 trends we're going to look at is a trend we call the badge of awesomeness. The badge of awesomeness was coined by someone that I'll talk about in just a moment. But this is the idea of living your life with nimbleness, adaptability, and thrift. Here, sometimes being thrifty is important because it gives you more freedom. The idea to get rid of excess things you don't need in your life and live more freely. Major League Baseball had a problem, which was during the crisis, it was very expensive and hard to take your family out to a baseball game. Costs a lot of money. So they came up with an idea called dynamic pricing. The idea was let the customer decide how much money they're willing to pay to go to the baseball game. Now, since baseball is all about statistics, they created statistics into the price of the tickets. So every ticket to every game varies based on the team record, the weather that day, and even the pitching matchups. So the whole idea is the tickets have different prices right up until game time based on what you, the customer, are willing to pay. Now, it's a very interesting idea. So rather than one size fits all, you're basically allowing the customer to choose what they think is the right price to pay based on what their interest is. So those are the ideas that are in dynamic pricing. And that was what we saw in the data, that nearly 2/3 and almost 80% of Japanese consumers were focused on living a more simpler, down-to-earth lifestyle, being a bit more nimble and flexible. Let's look at the 4 of the 5 trends. This is a trend we call block party capitalism. The idea behind block party capitalism is that there's big opportunities for local brands. Local brands have authenticity. Local brands support local communities. And most importantly, local brands have character. They have a story behind them, which makes them more attractive. Recycle Bank had a great idea, which is on our recycling bins, let's put a small RFID chip. Now, what happens is when you put your recycling out, it weighs your bin, and it sends that information to your account online. So you get frequent flyer miles for recycling. So suddenly you get earned credits by recycling. Recycle Bank then allows you to redeem those credits for all kinds of merchandise. And many companies want to have access to this green customer. So basically everybody wins. And in John's case, his small local government raised their recycling rates by 5% to 22% in the first year. A simple idea. And that's because people are looking for local solutions. They cannot wait for the government or big institutions to step in. The last trend is the trend around community. This is the idea that together we can be more powerful in the marketplace than any business. The idea that there is now an army of Davids. Through cooperative consumerism, we now have the power as consumers. Then I also interviewed Scott Monty. This is Scott. He is head of social media at Ford. Ford has undergone a great transition from a company that was in a lot of trouble to a company that's now, last year, was voted Marketer of the Year. Now, better cars help, but also a commitment to social media. What Scott did is he decided to create a new dialogue with customers. Now, the interesting thing that Scott told us was this very big company, for a moment, through this project, became very nimble. All the walls were broken down. Engineers could deal directly with customers. Now, that's the power of social. And what we see happening is we are transitioning from social media to social as business model, which means your company, in order to thrive and grow, needs to act and think and behave as a social vehicle in everything it does. So what we see is this growing trend toward community with consumerism. 2/3 of Americans, almost more than 2/3 of Japanese consumers, they believe now that they have power, that they can change behavior by supporting companies that do the right thing. Now, this is just a stated belief. I'm not saying that everyone is doing it right now, but the point is we didn't have this power 5 years ago. Now we have the power through social media to be a new force in the marketplace. So when we step back from the spend shift, we don't see a defeated customer. We don't see frugality and negativity. We actually see optimism that we have the power to change the rules of capitalism. Then the other thing, as I use the word consumer a lot tonight, but I think we have to get rid of this word. Customers are what matter. Customers are just as important as stakeholders to a business. After all, Peter Drucker said, the only purpose of a business is to have a customer. So by elevating the respect of the customer, you then start to see this change in how capitalism and how companies can behave. And then lastly, as we look around the world and think about growth, so much is written about emerging markets, about the important markets of the world that are going to be opportunities for growth for Japan, for the United States, for the UK. And those countries, you know, they're Brazil and they're Russia, India, China. But we actually ask you to think about it a different way, that maybe there's an emerging market for values. Because spend shift movement is about companies that have ethics, transparency, and quality at their core. We've seen in our data that people are more loyal to these brands. They're willing to support them and champion them, and they're willing to pay more for them. So in that context, we actually believe that there's great opportunity for values to be a driving force in today and tomorrow's marketplace. And thanks again for having me, and ありがとうございます。